So let's look at the prognosis and the prescription for getting rid of dukkha. So the good news is that even though dukkha exists and it causes your mental state to degrade as well, it is possible to rise up in these mental states. So you can go from level 50 up to level 100, or if you are accidentally in a lower mental state around level 20 or so, you can still work your way up and get to that level 100 as well. Now, these higher mental states are really sublime. You feel really peaceful, and the amount of dukkha is quite low. In fact, it's very hard to detect any dukkha for most people in these states as well. But as we discussed, these mental states are impermanent. So you can go up and also come down because of causes and conditions. So, our ultimate goal is to get out of this game of going up and down these mental states called samsara as well. And the good news is, it is possible to do that. You can completely get out of this game into this unconditioned, peaceful happiness called nirvana or moksha. Now, this nirvana or nibbana or even moksha is unconditioned because you get here not by doing something but by stopping that chain of dependent origination or that stress making process. And because it is unconditioned, it is possible to not only get a temporary glimpse of nirvana, but also to permanently attain it. And you do that by just getting rid of those bad habits that accidentally get you out of this unconditioned state, which is the habits that cause dependent origination to happen. Now, this wisdom that causes you to stop this dependent origination process so that you don't really get out of nirvana is similar to if you accidentally burnt your hand because you were touching on a stove or a really hot pan, you'll know that you wouldn't do anything similar in the future again. You wouldn't dare move your hand towards the stove purposefully and then burn yourself. In the same way, your mind just acquires this instinctive wisdom to just not perform those actions or intentions that lead to dependent origination to happen in the first place. In short, not only can you get out of depressive mental states and get to like really high states of happiness as well, you can also get out of this game of changing moods and changing mental states altogether. And you can do that by getting into this unconditioned state of being called nirvana. And nirvana can be understood for now as this ultimate peaceful state where you have perfect wisdom, perfect peace, and complete satisfaction. Also, your sense of self, or rather the delusion of having a self, goes away completely in this state of being as well. And because of that, you have instinctively really high levels of compassion and loving kindness towards others. Ultimately, nirvana is free from greed, hatred, and delusion. Now, let us look at the prescription. That is how we can be happy using all of the things that we have learned so far. Now, I like to explain this process using a metaphor of a hot air balloon. So, our minds are like a hot air balloon. They like to rise up on their own unless there is a resistance or a weight that's stopping them from rising up, or maybe even pulling them back down. So, our mind's natural inclination, unless something is stopping it, is to rise up to the highest mental state, let's say level 100, on its own. You don't really need to do anything to do that. And this goes against what most people think how their minds would be happy, or even how most meditators think how their minds would be happy. So they try and do something with their mind to become happy. They have this attitude of attaining happiness from the outside world. Or maybe in the case of meditators, it could be attaining happiness from the pleasant feelings inside your mind and body. So they try and grasp onto these pleasant feelings or the sources of happiness. And as you know, grasping leads to clinging and the dependent origination chain to happen, which actually causes your mental state to degrade or at best to not rise up on its own. So, in short, what you really need to do is just stop this dependent origination chain, and your mind would rise up these nice mental states on its own to its natural highest level. So, this feels like you are reversing these chains of dependent origination that have held you back down into, let's say, state 50. And that causes you to A, rise up these mental states, and B, you get to this state where there are no more chains to undo, and that is Nirvana. To stop or reverse dependent origination, there are various links that we can cut off. To start off, if we cut off the chain of reaction or becoming, that prevents our mind from falling back down into poorer mental states. This is also known as virtue. So if you're acting out of clinging, for example, thinking really unwholesome thoughts, or just about to do anything really unwholesome out of this reactivity, just stop that as soon as you see that. This is pretty similar to how most traditions around the world or most religions teach virtue as well, more or less. But now it has a technical definition. This technical definition of virtue makes it really objective to know what is virtuous at any given point of time. This is different than holding on to and even clinging to external rules as a basis for ethics and morality. The next link to undo is craving or clinging. And the way to do that is by letting go of the object that your attention wants to cling to. Now, as a side note, it is possible to change these links of object, concepts, of feelings, and that is basically to an extent what some forms of, or most forms of therapy, psychotherapy, try and do. It's something that isn't as powerful. I think that only acts at the symptom layer to a certain extent, and it can help you with some deep traumas, but it's really hard to scale that up to all things that cause you craving or aversion across the board. So, what we are undoing or changing isn't necessarily just the content of your mind, but most importantly, the reaction of that mind or how it craves or causes aversion to these objects. Third, we'll try and cut off the link of intention or doership. Now, the way to do that is twofold. One, you could have wholesome intentions that, even if they are efforted, work far better than the unwholesome intentions that lead to your attention clinging to objects in the future. Uh, Such wholesome intentions, like feelings of compassion or an attitude of loving kindness or even generosity, allow your attention to, even if it's formed, to not go on to cling to any objects, even if they're pleasant, or be aversive to unpleasant objects. And so that's stopping dependent origination right in the tracks. The other way could be using effortlessness. So, when you don't really have a sense of doership in your actions, when there is no mini me who's controlling these actions perfectly, that's when the chain gets cut off completely as well. Now, I'm not saying doing stuff using reaction, since that's not effortlessness, but doing actions out of clinging. This is something slightly different that we can maybe get into later. So these intentions, both effortless intentions and wholesome intentions, cause this illusion of a doer or self to decrease. That causes the attention that's produced in response to not really carry as much flavor or charge of an observer or the self. And finally, this causes the attention to not really crave and cling to whatever objects are being presented. Now, the fourth link to undo is of unawareness or ignorance. And the way to undo that is using awareness, or what people also like to call mindfulness. Now, once we know the links that we can cut off, we have various tools that we could use to cut off these links. And that's where a lot of these meditative techniques usually come into play. So, again, if you know the fundamentals, you don't need to cling to techniques. You can use what feels instinctive and what works for you in that given situation or the context. For example, some things work better for some people or just work better in certain situations. Like a technique could work far better for you in daily life rather than using the same technique in a meditation sit. And so you could have two different ways of cutting off these links in these two situations. For example, maintaining virtue is really important in daily life so that you don't degrade your mind. Whereas in a meditation sit, it's not something that you'll actively be focusing on. Similarly, it might be easier for some to cut off the chain of this unwholesome intention in daily life using a wholesome intention, like an attitude of loving kindness while doing actions, rather than by using effortlessness. So, once again, if you know these various techniques for each of these link cutting tools, you can mix and match according to your own needs. Finally, those who come from a Buddhist background would know these link cutting techniques as various parts of the Eightfold Noble Path. So, for example, letting go of bodily or speech based reactive intentions or reactions is similar to right action and right speech. Letting go of craving and clinging of the attention is similar to right effort. Using wholesome intentions or even effortlessness is similar to right intention. And finally, awareness is similar to right mindfulness. Also, going up these mental states automatically so that you also fall into these things called jhanas is equal to right samadhi. And the knowledge that all you need to do in your meditation is to undo dependent origination rather than focus your attention onto something to achieve this samadhi is a part of right view. In fact, this video constitutes the third and the fourth noble truths, and hence this makes a part of right view as well. So that's it. In the next video, we'll look at how we could use these four tools that we discussed to progress in our meditation sits and on our path to happiness.